In the bustling city of Lagos, where the sounds of commerce mixed with the prayers from mosques and churches, there lived a woman named Amara. Her story would become one that grandmothers would tell their granddaughters for generations to come, a tale of pride, humility, and the mysterious ways in which the universe balances all scales. Amara was born in a small village called Umuns, nestled in the eastern heartland of Nigeria. She was the daughter of a poor farmer, Okeke, and his wife, Adiz. From her earliest days, Amara showed a remarkable spirit. She was determined, intelligent, and possessed a kindness that seemed to flow from her very soul like water from a sacred spring. Her parents, though poor in material wealth, were rich in wisdom. Her father would often say, "My daughter, money is like the morning dew. It comes and goes with the sun. But character is like the baobab tree. It stands firm through all seasons." Amara carried these words in her heart as she grew. Despite their poverty, her parents scraped together enough money to send her to the village school. There, she excelled in her studies, often staying late into the evening, reading by candlelight in their small mud house. Her teachers marveled at her dedication and spoke of great things in her future. When Amara turned 18, her beauty had blossomed like the hibiscus flower after the first rains. Her skin was smooth as shea butter, her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth, and her smile could light up the darkest room. But it was not just her physical beauty that attracted attention. It was her grace, her humility, and the way she treated everyone, from the village chief to the lowest beggar, with equal respect and kindness. It was during the annual New Yam festival that Amara first met Chakwudi. He had come to Umans from the city, visiting his uncle, who was one of the village elders. Chakwudi was tall and handsome, with the confident bearing of a man who had seen the world beyond the village boundaries. He wore expensive clothes and spoke with the polished accent of someone educated in the city's best schools. Chakwudi was immediately captivated by Amara. He watched as she helped serve food to the elderly during the festival, how she laughed with the children, and how she moved with a natural elegance that no amount of city sophistication could replicate. He made inquiries about her and learned that she was not only beautiful but also intelligent and from a respectable, if poor, family. For 3 days, Chakwudi found reasons to be wherever Amara was. He offered to help carry water from the stream, though he had never done such work in his life. He sat through her father's long stories about farming, though he knew nothing of crops and soil. He did all this because he had fallen deeply, or so he believed, in love with Amara. On the evening before he was to return to Lagos, Chakwudi approached Okeke and formally asked permission to court his daughter. The old farmer looked at the city man with his fine clothes and smooth hands, and a shadow of concern crossed his weathered face. "Young man," Okeke said, "my daughter is precious to me, more valuable than all the gold in the earth. She is not just beautiful, but good-hearted. Before you take her hand, I must know, what do you see when you look at her?" Chakwudi, eager to impress, replied quickly, "I see the most beautiful woman I have ever encountered. I see intelligence and grace. I see someone who would make a perfect wife." Okeke nodded slowly, but his eyes remained troubled. "And what of her poverty?" "We are simple farmers. We have no dowry of money or lands to give you." "That matters not to me," Chakwudi declared passionately. "I have enough for both of us. I own a successful import business in Lagos. I can give her everything she has never had: a fine house, beautiful clothes, a life of comfort." Okeke called Amara and asked her opinion. She looked at Chakwudi with those bright, honest eyes and said, "Father, I barely know this man, but I see something in him that speaks to my heart. If you approve, I would like to know him better." And so began their courtship. Chakwudi returned to the village every few weeks, bringing gifts: fabric for Amara's mother, tobacco for her father, books for Amara. He spoke of the life they would build together, the opportunities that awaited her in the city, the children they would raise. Amara's mother, Adiz, was more observant than her husband. One evening, as she and Amara prepared dinner, she said, "My daughter, love is like planting a garden. The seeds you plant at the beginning will determine the harvest you reap. Make sure you plant seeds of honesty and mutual respect, not just attraction and promises." "What are you trying to tell me, mother?" Amara asked. "I am saying that Chakwudi is a good man, but I see something in his eyes when he looks at our poverty. It is not contempt, but neither is it comfort. A man who truly loves you must love all of you, including where you come from." But Amara was young and in love. She believed that her goodness and devotion would be enough to build a strong marriage. 6 months later, Chakwudi returned to Umans with his family to pay Amara's bride price. Though Okeke asked for very little, a modest sum and some traditional items, Chakwudi made a show of bringing much more, as if to demonstrate his wealth and generosity. The wedding was a grand affair, far grander than anything the village had seen in years. Chakwudi insisted on paying for everything: the food, the drinks, the musicians, the decorations. While the villagers celebrated, Okeke took his daughter aside one last time. "My daughter," he said, his eyes moist with tears, "remember always who you are. You are not defined by your husband's wealth or status. You are defined by your character and the goodness in your heart. Whatever happens in life, hold fast to that." Amara embraced her father, not fully understanding the weight of his words. "I will, father. I promise." And so Amara left her village to begin her new life in Lagos. The first years of marriage were happy ones. Chakwudi's business was thriving, and he provided Amara with everything he had promised: a beautiful home in a good neighborhood, fashionable clothes, domestic help. Amara, in turn, proved to be an excellent wife. She managed their household with efficiency and warmth, maintained his social connections with grace, and supported his business endeavors with intelligence and insight. In the second year of their marriage, Amara gave birth to a daughter they named Chioma, which means good God. 2 years later, a son followed, whom they called Chinedu, meaning God leads. Amara's life seemed complete. She had a husband, children, comfort, and security. But Amara was not one to simply rest on her circumstances. She remembered her father's teachings about self-reliance and the importance of productive work. She approached Chakwudi about starting a small business of her own. "A business?" Chakwudi laughed, not unkindly. "What need have you for a business? I provide everything you need." "It is not about need, my husband," Amara explained patiently. "It is about purpose. I want to contribute, to use the intelligence God gave me, to set an example for our children." Chakwudi considered this. In truth, having a wife with her own successful business would elevate his social standing among his peers. "Very well," he agreed. "What kind of business do you want to start?" Amara had been thinking about this for some time. She had noticed that many of the wealthy women in Lagos were willing to pay premium prices for high-quality traditional fabrics and clothing with modern designs. She proposed starting a boutique that would source authentic fabrics from villages across Nigeria and have them tailored into contemporary styles. Chakwudi agreed to provide the initial capital, a significant sum of 5 million naira. "Make me proud," he said as he handed her the check. "Show Lagos society that my wife is not just beautiful, but also a successful businesswoman." Amara threw herself into her new venture with characteristic dedication and intelligence. She traveled back to her village and neighboring communities, building relationships with weavers and dyers. She hired 2 talented seamstresses and rented a small shop in a busy market area. She named her business Heritage Threads. For the first 6 months, the business grew steadily. Amara's eye for quality and her innovative designs attracted a loyal customer base. She reinvested all the profits back into the business, expanding her inventory and hiring more staff. Chakwudi was proud, often mentioning his wife's boutique to his business associates and friends. Then, in the 8th month, everything began to change. A new competitor emerged, a large chain store backed by foreign investors, selling similar products at much lower prices. They could afford to take losses that would cripple a small business like Heritage Threads. Month by month, Amara watched as her customers drifted away, lured by the cheaper prices. She tried everything: sales, promotions, loyalty programs. She cut costs wherever she could. She stayed awake night after night, reviewing her accounts, trying to find a way to survive the onslaught. But it was like trying to hold back the ocean with her bare hands. Chakwudi, at first sympathetic, grew increasingly impatient. "You need to try harder," he would say. "Find a way to compete. This is business. Only the strong survive." "I am trying," Amara would respond, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I am doing everything I can." After 18 months of struggle, Heritage Threads was drowning in debt. Amara had borrowed money from banks, from family friends, even from some of Chakwudi's business partners. She had invested every naira of profit she had ever made, hoping for a turnaround that never came. The debt had grown to 15 million naira, 3 times what Chikwudi had initially invested. The breaking point came on a humid evening in August. Amara had just returned from a meeting with the bank where they had refused her request for additional time to repay her loans. She found Chikwudi in their living room, his face dark with anger. "I just got a call from Emeka," he said, his voice cold. "You borrowed 5 million naira from him for your business? Without even consulting me?" "I was going to tell you," Amara said wearily. "I just needed a little more capital to what? To throw more money into this failed enterprise? Do you have any idea what you have done to my reputation? Emeka is my business partner. Now everyone in our social circle knows that my wife cannot manage a simple boutique." "It is not a simple boutique." Amara's voice rose with frustration. "I built something good, something valuable. The competition was unfair. They have resources I cannot match." "Excuses," Chikwudi shouted. "You are making excuses. A good business person finds a way to succeed regardless of obstacles. But you came from poverty, and to poverty you return everything you touch." The words struck Amara like a physical blow. She stood frozen, staring at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. "What did you say?" Chikwudi, too angry to stop, continued. "I should have listened to my mother. She warned me about marrying a village girl with no business sense, no sophistication. But I thought love was enough. I thought your beauty and your goodness would be enough. But look at what you have done. You have embarrassed me, put us in debt, made me a laughingstock." Tears streamed down Amara's face, but her voice was steady. "I have made mistakes in business, that is true. But I have been a good wife to you. I have borne your children, managed your home, supported your business, honored your family. One business failure does not erase all of that. One business failure that has cost us 15 million naira. Chikwudi shot back. "Do you think money grows on trees? I work hard for every naira, and you throw it away on your vanity project." "Vanity?" Amara's voice rose. "You were the one who wanted me to start a business. You said it would elevate your status among your friends." The argument continued deep into the night. In the weeks that followed, things did not improve. Amara closed Heritage Threads, selling off what inventory remained to pay some of her debts. But the damage to their marriage was already done. Chikwudi became increasingly critical of everything Amara did. If dinner was late, he complained about her poor management. If the children were noisy, he blamed her for not controlling them properly. If bills were high, he accused her of wasteful spending. Every conversation seemed to circle back to her business failure and the debt she had incurred. Amara tried to make amends. She cut household expenses, sent away some of their domestic staff, stopped buying new clothes for herself. She took on freelance work, sewing, consulting, anything to earn money to pay down the debt. But no matter what she did, it was never enough in Chikwudi's eyes. Their friends began to notice the change in their relationship. At social gatherings, Chikwudi would make subtle digs about Amara's failed business venture or her village mentality. Amara bore these humiliations with quiet dignity, but inside, her heart was breaking. Then came the day that would change everything. It was a Saturday morning, almost 2 years after Heritage Threads had closed. Amara was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Chikwudi walked in, dressed in his best suit. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone formal and cold. Amara turned off the stove and sat down at the kitchen table, her heart already sensing what was coming. "I have given this a lot of thought," Chikwudi began, not meeting her eyes. "This marriage is not working. You are a good woman, Amara, but we are not compatible. Your business failure showed me that we come from different worlds, have different values. I cannot continue to carry the burden of your debts and your failures." "What are you saying?" Amara asked, though she already knew. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of doom. Amara felt as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. "We have children," she said quietly. "We made vows before God and our families." "I know," Chikwudi said, and for a moment, his face showed a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or guilt. "I will provide for the children's education and basic needs. But I cannot continue in this marriage. I have already consulted with a lawyer. The papers will be ready next week." "Is there someone else?" Amara had to ask. Chikwudi's silence was answer enough. Her name was Ngozi, a successful banker from a wealthy family, sophisticated and polished, everything that Chakoti now felt Amara was not. He had met her at a business function 6 months earlier, and she represented to him a fresh start, a chance to marry someone he felt was more his equal. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Chakuti's lawyer was expensive and ruthless. Because Amara had signed documents making her responsible for Heritage Thread's debts, she was leaving the marriage, not only with nothing but owing money. Chakuti retained the house, the cars, most of their savings. He agreed to pay for the children's education and a modest amount of child support, but he would retain primary custody, with Amara allowed to see them every other weekend. "This is not fair," Amara protested to her own lawyer, a court-appointed attorney who seemed more interested in closing the case than fighting for her rights. "I helped build his business. I supported him for years. I deserve more than this." "Mrs. Chakuti," the lawyer began. "That is not my name anymore," Amara interrupted bitterly. "I am Amara Okeke again." "Miss Okeke," the lawyer corrected. "Your husband's lawyer has documented your business debts, the money you lost, the damage to your husband's reputation. Fighting this will only cost you more money you do not have. I advise you to accept the settlement and move on with your life." And so Amara did. On a cold morning in November, she signed the papers that ended her marriage. Chioma, now 9 years old, cried and clung to her mother. Chunidu, at 7, did not fully understand what was happening but sensed his mother's pain. "Will we still see you, Mama?" Chioma asked through her tears. "Of course, my darling," Amara said, holding her daughter close. "Every other weekend, and I will call you every day." "This changes nothing about how much I love you, but it changed everything." Amara returned to Umans in disgrace. The woman who had left the village 8 years earlier as a radiant bride, full of hope and promise, returned broken and penniless. She moved back into her parents' small house, carrying only 2 suitcases of belongings. Her father, Okeke, now grayed and bent with age, simply opened his arms and held his daughter as she wept. Her mother prepared her favorite meal and said nothing, knowing that sometimes silence is the greatest comfort. The village, however, was not silent. Gossip spread like wildfire. Some pitied her, others whispered that she must have done something to deserve such treatment, and still others nodded knowingly, saying they had always suspected that the marriage would not last. For weeks, Amara barely left her parents' house. She was consumed by grief, shame, and a profound sense of failure. She had failed as a businesswoman. She had failed as a wife, and now she could only see her children every other weekend, making the long journey to Lagos on crowded buses that she could barely afford. One evening, as she sat outside her parents' house watching the sun set over the familiar landscape of her childhood, her father came and sat beside her. "My daughter," he said gently, "you have been home for 2 months now. You eat, you sleep, you cry, but you do not live." "I do not know how to live anymore, Father," Amara replied, her voice hollow. "Everything I tried to build, everything I worked for, it is all gone." "Is it?" Okeke asked. "You are still breathing. Your heart still beats. Your mind still thinks. You still have your character, your kindness, your intelligence. These things, did Chakwudi take these from you in the divorce?" "No, but then you have not lost everything. You have lost circumstances, situations, a particular life. But you have not lost yourself. The question is, will you allow this defeat to become your identity, or will you use it as the foundation for something new?" Amara looked at her father, this simple farmer who had never owned more than a few acres of land, who had never traveled beyond 100 miles from his birthplace, and yet possessed a wisdom that all the education and city living had never taught her. "I do not know where to start," she admitted. "Start with remembering who you are," Okeke said. "You are Amara, daughter of Okeke and Addis. You are intelligent and strong. You have known both prosperity and poverty, success and failure. These experiences have not diminished you, they have deepened you, if you let them." That night, for the first time since returning to Umans, Amara slept deeply and dreamlessly. When she woke in the morning, something had shifted inside her. The grief was still there, the pain was still real, but beneath it, she felt a small, stubborn flame of determination beginning to burn. She began to take walks around the village, reacquainting herself with the land of her childhood. She helped her mother in the garden, finding solace in the simple act of planting seeds and watching them grow. She visited old friends and teachers, listening to their stories and slowly reconnecting with the community she had left behind. One day, about 3 months after her return, Amara was walking through the village market when she noticed an old woman sitting beside a pile of beautiful clay pots. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Each pot was perfectly formed and decorated with intricate traditional patterns. "These are beautiful, Mama," Amara said, stopping to admire the work. The old woman, whose name was Mama Chidinma, smiled. "Thank you, my daughter. I have been making pots for 50 years, just as my mother taught me and her mother taught her." "Why are you selling them so cheaply?" Amara asked, noticing the low prices. Mama Chidinma shrugged. "Who will pay more for clay pots? The young people all want plastic containers from China. They say these old pots are for people who cannot afford modern things." As Amara continued her walk, an idea began to form in her mind. That evening, she asked her father if she could borrow his old bicycle. Over the next 2 weeks, she rode that bicycle to every village within a 20-mile radius, seeking out traditional craftspeople, potters, weavers, basket makers, wood carvers. What she found both excited and saddened her. There were dozens of incredibly talented artisans, most of them elderly, creating beautiful traditional items that they sold for next to nothing. Their children and grandchildren had mostly left for the cities, leaving these ancient crafts in danger of dying out. But Amara saw something else. She saw potential. She saw value. She saw an opportunity not just to make money, but to preserve something precious and give these artisans the recognition and compensation they deserved. She began visiting the artisans regularly, learning about their crafts, understanding their challenges, and building relationships. She took photographs of their work with her old phone and started researching online. What she discovered excited her. There was a growing global market for authentic, handcrafted traditional African art and functional items. People were willing to pay premium prices for genuine quality craftsmanship with a story behind it. But Amara had no money. The little she earned from odd jobs barely covered her basic expenses and her bus fares to Lagos to visit her children. She could not afford to start another business, and even if she could, the fear of failing again was paralyzing. It was her mother who provided the solution. "My daughter," Adiz said one evening, "do you remember your grandmother?" "Of course, Mama. But she died when I was very young." "Yes, when you were 5. But before she died, she gave me something to hold for you. She said I should give it to you when you truly needed it, when you were ready to understand its value." Adiz went into her room and returned with a small wooden box, worn smooth by age. Inside was an old cloth bag, and inside that was a collection of jewelry. Not expensive pieces, but traditional gold and coral beads, family heirlooms passed down through generations. "Your grandmother said these belonged to her grandmother and had been in our family for over 100 years. They are not worth a fortune, but if you sell them, they might give you enough to start again." Amara held the beads, feeling their weight, their history. "Mama, I cannot. These are family treasures." "And you are family," Adiz said firmly. "These beads are beautiful, but they are just things. You are our living legacy. If they can help you rise again, then that is the purpose they were meant to serve." With tears in her eyes, Amara took the beads to a reputable jeweler in the nearest town. He examined them carefully and offered her 250,000 naira, far more than she had expected. It was not a fortune, but it was a start. Amara called her business Heritage Hands. She started small, working from her parents' compound. She purchased inventory directly from the artisans at fair prices, prices that finally gave them dignity and proper compensation for their skills. She took professional photographs, wrote compelling stories about each artisan and their craft, and began marketing the products online. She created a simple website using free tools and began posting on social media platforms. Her posts were different from typical product advertisements. She did not just show a pot or a basket. She showed Mama Chidinma forming clay with her aged but skilled hands. She told the story of how the patterns on the baskets represented elements of Igbo cosmology. She explained the spiritual significance of the wood used in the carvings. At first, sales were slow. A pot here, a basket there. But Amara was patient and persistent. She used every naira of profit to buy more inventory and improve her marketing. She learned about search engine optimization, social media algorithms, and e-commerce platforms. 3 months in, something unexpected happened. A popular lifestyle blogger from South Africa discovered heritage hands and wrote an enthusiastic post about the authentic craftsmanship and the beautiful stories behind the products. The post went viral. Suddenly, orders began pouring in from across Africa and around the world. People were not just buying pots and baskets. They were buying pieces of cultural heritage, connections to authentic African traditions, and the satisfaction of knowing their purchase was directly helping preserve dying crafts and supporting elderly artisans. Amara worked day and night to fulfill orders. She hired young people from the village to help with packaging and shipping. She trained them in photography and social media marketing. She created a cooperative structure where the artisans received 60% of the sale price, unheard of in the industry, where middlemen typically kept 80 to 90% of profits. Within 6 months, Heritage Hands was generating more revenue than Heritage Threads ever had. But this time, Amara managed it differently. She did not take on debt. She grew slowly and sustainably. She reinvested profits carefully. Most importantly, she built a business model that was designed not just to make money, but to create lasting value for the communities involved. As word spread, more artisans approached her. Heritage Hands expanded beyond pots and baskets to include textiles, leather goods, jewelry, and furniture. Amara established quality standards and helped artisans improve their techniques while maintaining traditional methods. She created a training program where master artisans taught younger people, ensuring these crafts would not die out. International media began taking notice. Amara was featured in articles about social entrepreneurship, cultural preservation, and ethical business practices. Fashion designers and interior decorators from Europe and America began placing large orders. A major international retailer approached her about carrying Heritage Hands products in their stores. But Amara remembered the lesson of Heritage Threads. She turned down the large retail contract, recognizing that rapid expansion with external partners could compromise the values and control that made Heritage Hands successful. Instead, she grew at her own pace, maintaining direct relationships with her artisans and customers. 2 years after starting Heritage Hands from her parents' compound, Amara opened a physical showroom in the nearest town. It was designed as both a retail space and a cultural center, where visitors could watch artisans demonstrate their crafts and learn about traditional techniques. The showroom became a tourist attraction, bringing additional revenue to the local economy. By the 3rd year, Heritage Hands had annual revenues exceeding 50 million naira with healthy profit margins. Amara employed over 200 artisans directly and supported thousands more indirectly through her supply chain. She had paid off all her old debts from Heritage Threads. She had purchased land and built a comfortable house for her parents. She had savings and investments. But Amara did not rest on these achievements. She established the Heritage Hands Foundation, dedicated to preserving traditional African crafts. The foundation provided microloans to artisans, funded cultural education programs, and documented traditional techniques before they were lost forever. International development organizations began studying Heritage Hands as a model for sustainable development and cultural preservation. Amara was invited to speak at conferences in Geneva, New York, and Beijing. She was awarded recognition from UNESCO for her work in preserving intangible cultural heritage. Yet through all of this success, Amara remained humble. She still lived simply, she still returned to Umines regularly, and she never forgot the lessons of her failures and struggles. Every other weekend, she made the journey to Lagos to see her children, though now she traveled in comfort, no longer on crowded buses, but in her own car. Chioma and Chinetta had grown. They were now 13 and 11, old enough to understand more of what had happened between their parents. They had watched their mother's transformation with their own eyes, from the broken woman who had signed the divorce papers to the confident, successful entrepreneur who was making a difference in the world. Chakwudi, meanwhile, had remarried Ngozi within 6 months of the divorce being finalized. At first, everything seemed perfect. Ngozi was everything he thought he wanted: sophisticated, successful, from a wealthy family. But over time, cracks began to appear. Ngozi was not interested in being a mother to his children. She found them inconvenient, a reminder of his first marriage. She complained about the child support payments, calling them excessive. She pushed Chukwudi to see the children less, suggesting boarding schools far from Lagos. His business, which had thrived for years, began to struggle. He made some bad investments, lost some key contracts. The economic recession hit Nigeria hard, and Chukwudi found himself stretched thin financially. Ngozi, accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle, became increasingly demanding and critical. He began to hear stories about his ex-wife's success. At first, he dismissed them as exaggerations. Amara, successful? The woman who had failed so spectacularly at running a simple boutique? Impossible. But the stories persisted. Friends mentioned seeing articles about her. Business associates brought up heritage hands when discussing social enterprises. His own children spoke about their mother's work with obvious pride. One day, curiosity got the better of him. He searched for heritage hands online. What he found shocked him. There was Amara, his ex-wife, the woman he had divorced because she was a failure, featured in international business magazines, profiled on prominent websites, speaking at conferences alongside diplomats and CEOs. He clicked on the Heritage Hands website and saw the range of products, the professional presentation, the prices that were commanding premium rates. He looked at the About Us section and saw photos of Amara with her artisans, with community leaders, accepting awards and recognition. He read an interview where she discussed her journey. After my first business failed and my marriage ended, I returned to my village with nothing. I thought my life was over, but that failure taught me invaluable lessons about sustainable business practices, about the importance of building on genuine value rather than just chasing growth, and about staying true to your principles even when times are hard. The interviewer had asked, "Do you have any regrets?" "Every experience, good or bad, shapes us," Amara had replied. "My first business failure taught me humility. My divorce taught me that my worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion of me. These painful experiences were necessary for me to become who I am today. So no, I have no regrets. I am grateful for every lesson life has taught me." Chukwudi closed his laptop, a mixture of emotions churning inside him: disbelief, regret, and something else. Pride? Could he still feel pride in someone he had divorced? Or was it envy? 5 years after the divorce, Heritage Hands had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Amara had expanded into neighboring countries, opened showrooms in Accra, Nairobi, and Johannesburg. She had launched an online platform that connected traditional artisans directly with global customers, eliminating exploitative middlemen throughout Africa. Her personal wealth had grown substantially. Conservative estimates placed her net worth at over $100 million, a combination of Heritage Hands' value, her real estate investments, and her stakes in several related social enterprises. But wealth had not changed Amara's essential character. She still visited humans regularly. She still stopped to talk with every artisan. She still remembered the names of the elderly potters and weavers who had been there at the beginning. She had built a school in humans and established scholarship programs for girls from poor families. Her parents, Okichi and Adis, lived in comfort now, but they had refused Amara's offers of a mansion or luxury cars. "We are simple people," Okichi had said. "Comfort is good, but we do not need excess." Chioma was now 17, a bright and socially conscious young woman who wanted to study international development. Chinedu, at 15, showed a talent for technology and business. Both children spent more time with their mother now, often accompanying her on business trips during school holidays. Chakwudi's life had taken a different trajectory. His second marriage to Ngozi had ended in an even messier divorce than his first. She had left him for a younger, wealthier man, and her lawyers had been far more ruthless than his had been with Amara. The settlement had cost him dearly. His business had never recovered from the economic downturn. He had lost the house, the cars, much of his savings. He was not destitute. He still made a living, still maintained appearances, but he was far from the successful businessman he had once been. His relationship with his children had suffered too. They saw him infrequently now, and when they did, the conversations were strained. They had watched how he had treated their mother, and as they grew older, they had formed their own judgments about his character. One day, Chukwudi saw a notice about a Heritage Hands exhibition and cultural festival in Lagos. It would be a major event. Government officials, diplomats, business leaders, and cultural figures would attend. And Amara would be there. Chakudi decided to go. He told himself it was professional curiosity, a chance to network. But deep down, he knew he needed to see for himself what his ex-wife had become. The exhibition was held at a prestigious venue in Victoria Island. Chakudi arrived to find the space beautifully designed, showcasing the best of African craftsmanship. There were hundreds of guests, and the atmosphere was festive and sophisticated. And there, in the center of it all, was Amara. She wore a simple but elegant dress made from traditional fabric, her natural beauty enhanced rather than obscured by makeup. She moved through the crowd with grace and confidence, greeting guests, introducing artisans, explaining the significance of various pieces. She laughed easily, spoke eloquently, and commanded respect without demanding it. Chakudi watched from a distance, something tightening in his chest. This was the woman he had divorced because she was a failure? This woman, who was clearly admired and respected by everyone in the room? How had he been so blind? Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, they just looked at each other, former spouses, two people who had once promised to spend their lives together. Then Amara excused herself from her conversation and walked over to him. Chakudi, she said calmly. This is a surprise. Amara, he replied, suddenly feeling awkward. You look well, he managed to say. Thank you. I am well, she replied, her tone polite but distant, like she was speaking to a casual acquaintance rather than someone who had once been her husband. What brings you here? I wanted to see what you had built. I have been hearing stories, reading articles. I needed to see it for myself. Amara nodded, studying his face. She saw the lines of stress that had not been there before, the subtle signs of struggle that he tried to hide behind expensive cologne and a well-tailored suit. She felt a surprising emotion, not satisfaction at his apparent difficulties, but a gentle sadness for what might have been. Would you like a tour? She asked. I would like that very much, Chakudi replied. As they walked through the exhibition, Amara explained the story behind Heritage Hands, how it had started from nothing, how it had grown through patience and principle rather than aggressive expansion, how it had created sustainable livelihoods for thousands of artisans while preserving cultural heritage. This pot, she said, stopping before a large, intricately decorated clay vessel, was made by Mama Chidinma. She is 83 years old now. When I first met her 5 years ago, she was selling pots like this for 500 naira in the village market. This one will sell today for 150,000 naira, and she will receive 90,000 of that. She has trained 6 young people in her craft. Her art will not die with her. Chakudi was quiet for a long moment. You have done something remarkable, Amara. I am impressed. Thank you, she said simply. I need to say something, Chakudi said, his voice strained. I need to apologize. Amara turned to look at him fully. For what specifically? For everything. For how I treated you when Heritage Threads failed. For the things I said. For the divorce. For not seeing your true worth. I was a fool, Amara. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too proud, too shallow, too focused on status and appearances. Amara was silent for a moment, letting his words settle. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Chakudi, I appreciate your apology, but I want you to understand something. I am not successful today, despite what you did to me. I am successful because of it. When you divorced me, when you took almost everything from me, when you sent me back to my village with nothing, you actually gave me the greatest gift, though you did not mean to. What gift? He asked, confused. You freed me, Amara said. You freed me from trying to be someone I was not. You freed me from a marriage where my value was conditional. You freed me from the fear of losing things, because I had already lost everything and discovered I could survive it. You freed me to go back to my roots, to remember who I really was, to build something authentic and meaningful, rather than something designed to impress others. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I was married to you, I was living your life in your shadow. Heritage Threads failed partly because I was trying to build something that would make you proud rather than something that aligned with my own values and vision. After the divorce, I had nothing left to prove to anyone. I could finally build something true to myself. Chakwadi's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. I have made such terrible mistakes. Yes, you have, Amara agreed, not unkindly. But so have I. I made the mistake of measuring my worth by my husband's opinion of me. I made the mistake of seeking validation from external success rather than from living according to my values. We both had lessons to learn. Can you ever forgive me? He asked. Amara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I forgave you a long time ago, Chakoti. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger and resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I let go of all that years ago. It was essential for my healing and growth. Is there any chance? Chakoti began, then stopped, not quite daring to finish the question. No, Amara said firmly, but gently. That door is closed. We are the parents of 2 wonderful children, and I hope we can maintain a respectful relationship for their sake. But romantically, what we had is in the past. I have moved forward, and you should too. Chakoti nodded, accepting what he already knew to be true. For what it is worth, I am genuinely happy for your success. You deserve it. Thank you, Amara said. Then, surprising herself with her own generosity, she added, I heard that your business has been struggling. If you would like, I could connect you with some of my network. I am part of a business association that focuses on helping entrepreneurs recover from setbacks. No strings attached, just one business person helping another. Chakoti was taken aback by her kindness. After everything I did to you, you would help me? I would help you for the same reason I help the artisans in my supply chain, because lifting others up does not diminish me, because there is enough success to go around, because holding grudges serves no purpose, and because despite everything, you are the father of my children, and their lives are better when you are thriving. Before Chakoti could respond, Chioma and Chinedu appeared, having just arrived from a school event. They greeted their father with polite but not warm hugs, then embraced their mother with genuine affection. Mama, this exhibition is amazing, Chioma exclaimed. Everyone at school is talking about it. They say the president might come. And Mama, can I help with the technology showcase tomorrow? Chinedu asked eagerly. I have been working on that app that helps customers learn about the artisans' stories through augmented reality. Amara beamed at her children with obvious pride. Of course, my dear. Your father and I were just catching up. Chakoti, I need to return to my hosting duties, but please enjoy the exhibition. As she walked away with her children, Chakoti stood alone in the crowd, watching his former wife, confident, successful, surrounded by people who respected and admired her, and felt the full weight of what he had lost. The story of Amara and Chakoti spread through Lagos society like wildfire. It was too compelling not to become gossip, the poor village girl who became a successful entrepreneur after her wealthy husband divorced her for failing in business. But the story took on different meanings depending on who told it. Some saw it as a tale of poetic justice, the proud man brought low and the humble woman elevated. Others saw it as a story about the dangers of judging people by their temporary circumstances rather than their inherent character. Still others took it as a lesson about the unpredictability of success and failure. But for Amara, the story was about something deeper. It was about the difference between external validation and internal worth, about the dangers of building your identity on unstable foundations, and about the mysterious ways in which our darkest moments can become the soil from which our greatest growth springs. Word of the encounter between Amara and Chakoti reached Yumun's, and one evening, as Amara sat with her father watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through all the years, Okeke shared his thoughts. My daughter, he said, you remember what I told you on your wedding day? That you should always remember who you are? I remember, father, Amara replied. For a time, you forgot, Okeke said. In the city, with the wealth and the status, you began to measure yourself by those things. When you lost them, you thought you had lost yourself. But you were wrong. Those things were never you. They were just circumstances that surrounded you for a time. I understand that now, Amara said. The final chapter of our story takes place 5 years later, 20 years after the divorce that had seemed like the end of Amara's world. Heritage Hands had grown beyond even Amara's ambitious dreams. The company had expanded to 32 African countries and had opened boutiques in New York, London, Paris, and Tokyo. But it had never lost its soul. It still prioritized artisan welfare over profit maximization, cultural preservation over mass production, sustainable growth over rapid expansion. The company had pioneered a new model of ethical commerce that business schools now taught as a case study. Amara had written a book about her journey titled The Strength in Breaking, which became an international bestseller. She had become one of Africa's most influential voices on entrepreneurship, women's empowerment, and cultural preservation. But perhaps the most significant development was personal rather than professional. Chioma had recently gotten engaged to a young man named Obi, a doctor who worked with underserved communities. As Amara helped her daughter plan the wedding, she could not help but reflect on her own wedding 25 years earlier. One afternoon, as they were reviewing wedding preparations, Chioma said, "Mama, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course, my darling," Amara replied. "Do you ever regret marrying my father? Given how things turned out, do you wish you had made a different choice?" Amara set down the papers she was holding and gave her daughter her full attention. "That is a complicated question, Chioma. Do I regret how your father treated me? Yes. Do I regret the pain of the divorce? Of course. But do I regret the marriage itself? No. How can you not?" Chioma asked. "He hurt you so deeply." "Because that marriage gave me you and your brother," Amara said simply. "And because that marriage, difficult as it was, taught me essential lessons about myself. If things had been easy, if I had never failed, if I had never lost everything, I would not be who I am today. I would not have built Heritage Hands. I would not have discovered my true purpose and calling." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your father made mistakes, serious mistakes. But I made mistakes too. I sought validation from him rather than from myself. I measured my worth by external standards. I tried to build an identity on unstable foundations. The marriage failed not just because of what he did, but because of who we both were at that time. We were not ready to truly see and value each other." "But you were a good wife to him," Chioma protested. "You did nothing wrong." Being a good wife in the traditional sense, managing the home, supporting his career, bearing children, is not the same as being a whole person, Amara explained. "I lost myself in trying to be what I thought he wanted. That was my mistake. Your father's mistake was judging my worth by my temporary circumstances rather than my inherent character. We were both operating from flawed understandings of love, marriage, and value." She smiled at her daughter. "But here is what I want you to understand as you prepare for your own marriage. You are marrying Obi as a complete person, not as someone who needs him to validate your worth. He is marrying you as a complete person, not as someone he wants to shape into his ideal. You respect each other's strength, support each other's growth, and value each other's inherent worth regardless of circumstances. That is a foundation that can weather any storm." Chioma hugged her mother tightly. "I am so proud of you, Mama. You took something painful and turned it into something beautiful, not just Heritage Hands, but yourself. You showed me and Chinedu that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it." On the day of Chioma's wedding, both Amara and Chikwudi walked their daughter down the aisle. It was a moment that would have been impossible 15 years earlier, but time and healing had made it possible. They did it not for themselves, but for their daughter, setting aside old pain for the sake of new joy. During the reception, Chikwudi found a moment to speak with Amara privately. "Thank you for allowing me to be part of this," he said. "I know I do not deserve your grace." "Today is not about what you deserve or what I deserve," Amara replied gently. "It is about our daughter and her happiness. And despite everything, we did something right together. We created two remarkable human beings." Chikwudi nodded, then said something he had been wanting to say for years. "Amara, I want you to know that I have spent the last 15 years trying to become the man I should have been when I was married to you. I will never have another chance with you. I understand that. But I am determined to honor your memory, by which I mean your impact on my life, by being better. That is all any of us can do," Amara said. "We cannot change the past, but we can choose who we become. I am glad you have chosen growth over bitterness." As the celebration continued around them, these two people who had once been married, who had once hurt each other deeply, stood in a moment of genuine peace, not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had both learned from it and moved beyond it. Later that evening, as Amara stood watching the celebration, her mother came and stood beside her. "You are thinking about something deep," Adiz observed. "I am thinking about the strange paths life takes us on, Amara replied. If someone had told me 20 years ago, when I was signing those divorce papers with tears streaming down my face, that I would end up here, successful, fulfilled, at peace, I would never have believed them. That day felt like the end of everything. But it was actually the beginning, Adi said. Yes, Amara agreed. But I could not see that then. I could only see the loss, the failure, the shame. I could not imagine that those broken pieces would become the foundation for something stronger and more beautiful than what I had lost. Adi smiled wisely. That is the nature of transformation, my daughter. The caterpillar must dissolve completely in the cocoon before it can become a butterfly. If someone told the caterpillar what was happening, it would feel like death. But it is actually rebirth. Amara turned to her mother. When did you become so philosophical? I have always been philosophical, Adiz laughed. You just had to go through enough life to appreciate it. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Amara found herself alone for a moment in the garden. She looked up at the stars, the same stars that had shone on her 20 years ago when her world was falling apart, the same stars that had shone on her ancestors for generations. She thought about the woman she had been, young, naive, seeking validation from outside herself. She thought about the woman she had become, strong, wise, secure in her own worth. The journey between those two women had been long and painful, but it had been necessary. She thought about her ex-husband and felt no anger, no bitterness, only a kind of compassionate understanding. He had been young too, shaped by society's shallow values, unable to see beyond appearances and circumstances. He had made terrible mistakes, but he had also eventually learned from them and grown. That was all anyone could ask. She thought about her business failures and successes and realized that the failures had taught her more than the successes ever could. Heritage Threads had failed, but that failure had taught her humility, resilience, and the importance of building on authentic values. Heritage Hands had succeeded precisely because she had learned those lessons. Most of all, she thought about her children, bright, compassionate, grounded young people who understood that true worth comes from character, not circumstances. They had watched their mother face adversity and overcome it with grace and determination. That was a gift more valuable than any inheritance she could leave them. As she turned to go back inside, Amara whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for an easy life, but for a meaningful one, not for avoiding pain, but for surviving it and growing from it, not for the absence of failure, but for the strength to rise from it. And so our story ends where it began, with Amara, a woman whose worth was measured not by what she possessed or what others thought of her, but by the content of her character and the impact of her life. She had been poor and become rich, had been married and divorced, had failed and succeeded. Through it all, she had remained essentially herself, kind, humble, resilient, and committed to making a positive difference in the world. The elders of humans would tell this story for generations to come, and each time they told it, they would end with the same moral. A person's true value is not determined by their circumstances, their wealth, or how others treat them. It is determined by their character, by how they treat others, how they handle adversity, and whether they use their experiences, both good and bad, to become better people and lift others up. This is the lesson of Amara, the woman who lost everything and gained the world. And the children who heard this story would carry it in their hearts, understanding that failure is not the end, that circumstances are temporary, that character is eternal, and that the deepest suffering can become the foundation for the greatest strength. For such is the way of life, that our greatest trials can become our greatest teachers, our deepest wounds can become our sources of wisdom, and our moments of breaking can become the beginning of our most beautiful transformations. The end epilogue many years later, when Amara was an old woman, a young entrepreneur came to visit her, seeking advice. The young woman had just experienced a business failure and was devastated, questioning whether she should continue or give up. Amara listened patiently to her story, then smiled. That same warm smile that had comforted artisans, inspired employees, and won over skeptics throughout her long career. Let me tell you a story, Amara said. Once, there was a woman who lost everything, her business, her marriage, her home, her dignity. She returned to her village with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of pain. Everyone thought her life was over, but it was actually just beginning. As she told her own story, not to boast but to teach, the young woman listened with growing hope. When Amara finished, the young woman asked, "But how did you find the courage to start again?" Amara thought for a moment, then replied with the wisdom of a lifetime. I realized that failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the path to it. I realized that my worth was not determined by my circumstances, but by my character. And most importantly, I realized that as long as I was breathing, my story was not over. Every day is a new opportunity to write a better chapter. The young woman left that day with renewed determination. Years later, she would become successful in her own right and would tell others about the woman who taught her that our greatest defeats can become the foundation for our greatest victories. And so the story of Amara continued to ripple outward, touching lives, inspiring change, and reminding people of timeless truths, that character matters more than circumstances, that our responses to adversity define us more than the adversity itself, and that with resilience, wisdom, and grace, we can transform even our deepest pain into our greatest purpose. This is the way of the truly strong. They do not avoid breaking, but they know how to put themselves back together in a way that makes them more beautiful than before. This is the lesson of Amara. This is the wisdom of our ancestors. This is the truth that endures. Do you? Okeke asked gently. Because even now, with all your success, there is a danger. The danger is that you will begin to measure yourself by this new success, by your wealth, by your recognition. And if that happens, then you have not really learned the lesson. You have just traded one false identity for another. Amara considered her father's words carefully. Then what should I measure myself by? By your character, Okeke said simply. By whether you treat people with kindness and respect, regardless of their status. By whether you use your abilities to help others or only yourself. By whether you remain humble enough to keep learning and growing. By whether you stay true to your values even when it costs you something. These are the measures that matter. Everything else is just noise. Amara reached over and held her father's weathered hand. You are the wisest man I know, father. Okichi laughed. I am a simple farmer, but I have lived long enough to see that the things people chase, money, status, power, are like chasing shadows. They can never be caught because they have no substance. But character, integrity, compassion, these things are real. They endure. 6 months after the exhibition, Amara received an unexpected visitor at the Heritage Hands headquarters. It was Ngozi, Chikwudi's second ex-wife. Ngozi sat in Amara's office, looking uncomfortable and somewhat humbled. I am sure you are surprised to see me, she began. I am curious, Amara admitted, but I do not judge. How can I help you? Ngozi took a deep breath. I need to apologize to you. When Chikwudi and I got together, I knew he was newly divorced. I knew you were struggling. I listened to his version of events, that you were a failed businesswoman, unsophisticated, not his equal. I am ashamed to say I believed him. More than that, I encouraged his narrative because it justified what we were doing. I see, Amara said, her face neutral. But now I understand the truth, Ngozi continued. Chikwudi did not just divorce you because your business failed. He divorced you because he is a man who measures people by their temporary circumstances rather than their intrinsic worth. He did the same thing to me when my own career hit a rough patch. The way he treated you, dismissive, contemptuous, cruel, he treated me the same way when I was no longer serving his ego. I am sorry you experienced that, Amara said sincerely. It is a painful lesson to learn. I came here not just to apologize, but to ask for your advice, Ngozi said. You rebuilt your life after divorce. You created something meaningful from nothing. I am trying to do the same, but I do not know where to start. I feel lost and ashamed and angry at myself for the choices I made. Amara was quiet for a moment, then she spoke with the hard-won wisdom of her own journey. The first thing you must do is forgive yourself. Yes, you made mistakes. We all do. But those mistakes do not define you unless you let them. You can choose to learn from them and become a better person. How did you do it? Ngozi asked. How did you overcome the shame, the sense of failure? I went back to my roots, Amara said. I stopped trying to be someone I was not. I stopped measuring my worth by external standards. I reconnected with my values, with what truly mattered to me. And I built from there, slowly and authentically. She paused, then added, but I also had to do the hard work of examining my own role in what happened. It would be easy to blame Chikwudi for everything, but I also made choices. I chose to seek validation from him rather than from myself. I chose to define success in his terms rather than my own. Understanding my part in it was painful, but necessary for growth. Ngozi nodded, absorbing this. Can I ask you something else? How did you forgive him? Forgiveness is not about saying what someone did was okay, Amara explained. It is about releasing yourself from the prison of bitterness and anger. I forgave Chakwudi not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Holding on to anger was only hurting me, not him. The two women talked for over an hour. By the end of their conversation, something unexpected had happened, a kind of understanding, perhaps even the beginning of a friendship, had formed between them. They were, after all, women who had shared similar experiences with the same man, and there was a certain solidarity in that. As Ngozi was leaving, she turned back. One more thing. Thank you for being gracious to Chakwudi at the exhibition. He told me about it. He said your kindness made him feel worse than any cruelty could have. It forced him to confront his own character in a way that nothing else had. That was not my intention, Amara said truthfully. I was simply being myself, someone who believes that everyone deserves respect and second chances, regardless of how they have treated me. After Ngozi left, Amara sat at her desk, reflecting on the strange turn of events. Life had a way of coming full circle in unexpected ways. She thought about the journey she had traveled, from a poor village girl to a successful wife to a divorced woman with nothing to a self-made entrepreneur. Each phase had taught her something essential. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her assistant. Ms. Amara, there is someone here to see you. She says she has traveled from a village near Kano. She has heard about Heritage Hands and wants to know if you would consider working with artisans from the north. Amara smiled. This was why she did what she did, not for the money or the recognition, but for the opportunity to lift others up, to preserve cultural heritage, to create opportunities where none had existed before. Send her in, Amara said. I always have time for artisans. 10 years after her divorce, Heritage Hands had become a Pan-African institution. The company had expanded to 18 countries, employed over 5,000 artisans directly, and had created economic opportunities for tens of thousands more. The Heritage Hands Foundation had established cultural centers across the continent, preserving traditional crafts and providing education and economic support to rural communities. Amara herself had become one of Africa's most successful entrepreneurs. Her personal wealth was estimated at over $150 million, but she lived modestly and gave away a significant portion of her income to charitable causes. She had been recognized with numerous awards, including the prestigious African Leadership Prize and an honorary doctorate from the University of Lagos. But perhaps her greatest achievement was not measured in money or accolades. It was measured in lives changed. The elderly artisan who could now afford medical care and send grandchildren to school. The young person who learned a traditional craft and stayed in their village instead of migrating to overcrowded cities. The cultural traditions that were preserved for future generations. The women who found economic independence and dignity through their work. Chioma was now 22, having graduated from university with a degree in international development. She worked with the Heritage Hands Foundation, focusing on youth education and cultural preservation. She was her mother's daughter in every way, intelligent, compassionate, and committed to making a difference. Chinedu, at 20, was studying business and technology. He had developed several innovative apps that helped Heritage Hands connect artisans with customers and manage their complex supply chain. He had also started his own small tech company, applying the ethical business principles his mother had modeled. Both children had a respectful but distant relationship with their father. Chakwudi had slowly rebuilt his life over the past decade. He had taken Amara's advice and connected with her business network, which had helped him recover from his financial difficulties. He had started a new, smaller business and had learned to live more modestly. More importantly, he had done considerable soul-searching about his values and his treatment of others. He had never remarried. When asked about it in a rare interview, he said, "I had the privilege of being married to an extraordinary woman, and I did not appreciate her. I threw away something precious because I did not recognize its value. That is a mistake I have to live with. I do not deserve another chance at marriage until I have become a better man." True reconciliation between Amara and Chakwudi never occurred. The wounds had been too deep, the trust too broken. But over the years, they developed a cordial relationship based on mutual respect and their shared love for their children. Chakwudi publicly acknowledged his past mistakes in a newspaper interview, crediting Amara's grace and forgiveness as instrumental in his own personal growth. "Amara taught me the most important lesson of my life," he had said in the interview. "She taught me that a person's value is not determined by their circumstances, their wealth, or their successes and failures. It is determined by their character, by how they treat others, especially when those others can do nothing for them in return. I failed to see that when we were married. I judged her by her temporary failure rather than her permanent character. It is a mistake I will never make again." The interview had gone viral, shared across African social media. Many people praised Chakwudi for his honesty, though others pointed out that such admissions of fault, while commendable, do not undo the harm caused. Amara herself did not comment publicly on the interview, maintaining her characteristic grace and privacy. On the 15th anniversary of Heritage Hands, Amara organized a celebration in Umans, bringing the festivities back to where it all began. Dignitaries from across Africa attended, along with hundreds of artisans, employees, and community members. But the guests of honor were her parents, Okeke and Adis, now elderly but still sharp and engaged. In her speech, Amara spoke not of her success but of her failures and what they had taught her. 15 years ago, she began, addressing the crowd gathered in the village square, I returned to this village in disgrace. My business had failed. My marriage had ended. I had lost everything I thought defined me. I felt like my life was over. I was 33 years old, and I believed my best years were behind me. She paused, looking around at the familiar faces. I was wrong. My life was not ending, it was beginning. But it could not truly begin until I had been stripped of all the false identities I had built. I had to lose everything to discover what really mattered. Some people have praised me for my success, but I want to tell you the truth. This success is not really mine. It belongs to Mama Chidinma, who taught me the value of patient craftsmanship. It belongs to all the artisans who trusted me with their work. It belongs to my parents, who taught me that character matters more than circumstances. It belongs to my children, who gave me a reason to keep going when I wanted to give up. It belongs to this community, which welcomed me back when I had nothing and reminded me of who I really was. Amara's voice grew stronger. I also want to speak to anyone here who is facing failure right now, who feels like they have lost everything, who thinks their life is over. I am here to tell you that failure is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. The question is not whether you will face failure. We all do. The question is what you will do with it. Will you let it define you, or will you use it as a foundation to build something better? When my business failed and my marriage ended, I had a choice. I could have stayed bitter, angry, consumed by what I had lost. Instead, I chose to learn, to grow, to rebuild. And what I built the second time was stronger and more meaningful than what I lost because it was built on the right foundation, not on pride or external validation, but on authentic values and genuine service to others. She concluded, so today, we celebrate not just Heritage Hands, but the power of resilience, the importance of community, the value of cultural heritage, and the truth that our setbacks do not have to be our endpoints. Thank you all for being part of this journey. The crowd erupted in applause. Among them, standing at the back, was Chakwudi. He had been invited by his children and had come, wanting to witness this moment. As he watched Amara, confident, eloquent, surrounded by love and respect, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: regret for what he had thrown away, admiration for what she had become, and a strange kind of gratitude for the role he had played in her journey, even if that role had been as the antagonist in her story. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued with traditional music and dancing, Okeke found Amara standing alone for a moment, looking out over the village that had shaped her. You have done well, my daughter, he said, joining her. I had a good teacher, Amara replied, linking her arm through his. Life has been your real teacher, Okeke said. I just reminded you of a few simple truths. But you took those truths and built something magnificent with them. Father, can I ask you something? Amara said. That day when Chakwudi first came to ask for my hand in marriage, I saw doubt in your eyes. What did you see that made you doubt? Okeke was quiet for a long moment. I saw a man who was in love with your beauty and your goodness, but I was not sure if he truly respected your strength. I saw a man who wanted to give you things, but I was not sure if he would stand by you when you needed support rather than support. I saw a man who was proud of what you could add to his life, but I was not sure if he valued who you were independent of him. Why did you give your blessing then? Amara asked. Because you loved him and because some lessons can only be learned through experience. I could have forbidden the marriage, but then you would have wondered what if for the rest of your life. Instead, you married him, you learned the lessons you needed to learn, and you emerged stronger and wiser. If I had protected you from that pain, I would have also prevented you from that growth. Amara felt tears prick her eyes. You are a wise man, father. No, Okek said gently. I am just a father who loves his daughter enough to let her make her own mistakes and learn her own lessons. That is what real love does. It does not protect people from all pain, but it supports them through it. As the sun set over Umuns, casting long shadows across the village square, Amara felt a profound sense of peace. She had traveled far, from this village to the city and back again, from poverty to wealth, from marriage to divorce, from failure to success. But the most important journey had been internal, from seeking validation from others to finding worth within herself, from measuring success by external standards to defining it by her own values, from trying to be who others wanted her to be becoming authentically herself. The final chapter of our story takes place 5 years later, 20 years after the divorce that had seemed like the end of Amara's world. Heritage Hands had grown beyond even Amara's ambitious dreams. The company had expanded to 32 African countries and had opened boutiques in New York, London, Paris, and Tokyo. But it had never lost its soul. It still prioritized artisan welfare over profit maximization, cultural preservation over mass production, sustainable growth over rapid expansion. The company had pioneered a new model of ethical commerce that business schools now taught as a case study. Amara had written a book about her journey titled The Strength in Breaking, which became an international bestseller. She had become one of Africa's most influential voices on entrepreneurship, women's empowerment, and cultural preservation. But perhaps the most significant development was personal rather than professional. Chioma had recently gotten engaged to a young man named Obi, a doctor who worked with underserved communities. As Amara helped her daughter plan the wedding, she could not help but reflect on her own wedding 25 years earlier. One afternoon, as they were reviewing wedding preparations, Chioma said, "Mama, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course, my darling," Amara replied. "Do you ever regret marrying my father? Given how things turned out, do you wish you had made a different choice?" Amara set down the papers she was holding and gave her daughter her full attention. "That is a complicated question, Chioma. Do I regret how your father treated me? Yes. Do I regret the pain of the divorce? Of course. But do I regret the marriage itself? No. How can you not?" Chioma asked. "He hurt you so deeply." "Because that marriage gave me you and your brother," Amara said simply. "And because that marriage, difficult as it was, taught me essential lessons about myself. If things had been easy, if I had never failed, if I had never lost everything, I would not be who I am today. I would not have built Heritage Hands. I would not have discovered my true purpose and calling." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your father made mistakes, serious mistakes. But I made mistakes too. I sought validation from him rather than from myself. I measured my worth by external standards. I tried to build an identity on unstable foundations. The marriage failed not just because of what he did, but because of who we both were at that time. We were not ready to truly see and value each other." "But you were a good wife to him," Chioma protested. "You did nothing wrong." "Being a good wife in the traditional sense, managing the home, supporting his career, bearing children, is not the same as being a whole person," Amara explained. "I lost myself in trying to be what I thought he wanted. That was my mistake. Your father's mistake was judging my worth by my temporary circumstances rather than my inherent character. We were both operating from flawed understandings of love, marriage, and value." She smiled at her daughter. "But here is what I want you to understand as you prepare for your own marriage. You are marrying Obi as a complete person, not as someone who needs him to validate your worth. He is marrying you as a complete person, not as someone he wants to shape into his ideal. You respect each other's strength, support each other's growth, and value each other's inherent worth regardless of circumstances. That is a foundation that can weather any storm. Chioma hugged her mother tightly. I am so proud of you, Mama. You took something painful and turned it into something beautiful, not just Heritage Hands, but yourself. You showed me and Chinedu that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it. On the day of Chioma's wedding, both Amara and Chikwudi walked their daughter down the aisle. It was a moment that would have been impossible 15 years earlier, but time and healing had made it possible. They did it not for themselves, but for their daughter, setting aside old pain for the sake of new joy. During the reception, Chikwudi found a moment to speak with Amara privately. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this, he said. I know I do not deserve your grace. Today is not about what you deserve or what I deserve, Amara replied gently. It is about our daughter and her happiness. And despite everything, we did something right together. We created two remarkable human beings. Chikwudi nodded, then said something he had been wanting to say for years. Amara, I want you to know that I have spent the last 15 years trying to become the man I should have been when I was married to you. I will never have another chance with you. I understand that. But I am determined to honor your memory, by which I mean your impact on my life, by being better. That is all any of us can do, Amara said. We cannot change the past, but we can choose who we become. I am glad you have chosen growth over bitterness. As the celebration continued around them, these two people who had once been married, who had once hurt each other deeply, stood in a moment of genuine peace, not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had both learned from it and moved beyond it. Later that evening, as Amara stood watching the celebration, her mother came and stood beside her. You are thinking about something deep, Adiz observed. I am thinking about the strange paths life takes us on, Amara replied. If someone had told me 20 years ago, when I was signing those divorce papers with tears streaming down my face, that I would end up here, successful, fulfilled, at peace, I would never have believed them. That day felt like the end of everything. But it was actually the beginning, Adi said. Yes, Amara agreed. But I could not see that then. I could only see the loss, the failure, the shame. I could not imagine that those broken pieces would become the foundation for something stronger and more beautiful than what I had lost. Adis smiled wisely. That is the nature of transformation, my daughter. The caterpillar must dissolve completely in the cocoon before it can become a butterfly. If someone told the caterpillar what was happening, it would feel like death. But it is actually rebirth. Amara turned to her mother. When did you become so philosophical? I have always been philosophical, Adiz laughed. You just had to go through enough life to appreciate it. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Amara found herself alone for a moment in the garden. She looked up at the stars, the same stars that had shone on her 20 years ago when her world was falling apart, the same stars that had shone on her ancestors for generations. She thought about the woman she had been, young, naive, seeking validation from outside herself. She thought about the woman she had become, strong, wise, secure in her own worth. The journey between those two women had been long and painful, but it had been necessary. She thought about her ex-husband and felt no anger, no bitterness, only a kind of compassionate understanding. He had been young too, shaped by society's shallow values, unable to see beyond appearances and circumstances. He had made terrible mistakes, but he had also eventually learned from them and grown. That was all anyone could ask. She thought about her business failures and successes and realized that the failures had taught her more than the successes ever could. Heritage Threads had failed, but that failure had taught her humility, resilience, and the importance of building on authentic values. Heritage Hands had succeeded precisely because she had learned those lessons. Most of all, she thought about her children, bright, compassionate, grounded young people who understood that true worth comes from character, not circumstances. They had watched their mother face adversity and overcome it with grace and determination. That was a gift more valuable than any inheritance she could leave them. As she turned to go back inside, Amara whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for an easy life, but for a meaningful one, not for avoiding pain, but for surviving it and growing from it, not for the absence of failure, but for the strength to rise from it. And so our story ends where it began, with Amara, a woman whose worth was measured not by what she possessed or what others thought of her, but by the content of her character and the impact of her life. She had been poor and become rich, had been married and divorced, had failed and succeeded. Through it all, she had remained essentially herself, kind, humble, resilient, and committed to making a positive difference in the world. The elders of humans would tell this story for generations to come, and each time they told it, they would end with the same moral. A person's true value is not determined by their circumstances, their wealth, or how others treat them. It is determined by their character, by how they treat others, how they handle adversity, and whether they use their experiences, both good and bad, to become better people and lift others up. This is the lesson of Amara, the woman who lost everything and gained the world. And the children who heard this story would carry it in their hearts, understanding that failure is not the end, that circumstances are temporary, that character is eternal, and that the deepest suffering can become the foundation for the greatest strength. For such is the way of life, that our greatest trials can become our greatest teachers, our deepest wounds can become our sources of wisdom, and our moments of breaking can become the beginning of our most beautiful transformations. The end epilogue many years later, when Amara was an old woman, a young entrepreneur came to visit her, seeking advice. The young woman had just experienced a business failure and was devastated, questioning whether she should continue or give up. Amara listened patiently to her story, then smiled. That same warm smile that had comforted artisans, inspired employees, and won over skeptics throughout her long career. "Let me tell you a story," Amara said. "Once, there was a woman who lost everything, her business, her marriage, her home, her dignity. She returned to her village with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of pain. Everyone thought her life was over, but it was actually just beginning." As she told her own story, not to boast but to teach, the young woman listened with growing hope. When Amara finished, the young woman asked, "But how did you find the courage to start again?" Amara thought for a moment, then replied with the wisdom of a lifetime, "I realized that failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the path to it. I realized that my worth was not determined by my circumstances, but by my character. And most importantly, I realized that as long as I was breathing, my story was not over. Every day is a new opportunity to write a better chapter." The young woman left that day with renewed determination. Years later, she would become successful in her own right and would tell others about the woman who taught her that our greatest defeats can become the foundation for our greatest victories. And so the story of Amara continued to ripple outward, touching lives, inspiring change, and reminding people of timeless truths, that character matters more than circumstances, that our responses to adversity define us more than the adversity itself, and that with resilience, wisdom, and grace, we can transform even our deepest pain into our greatest purpose. This is the way of the truly strong. They do not avoid breaking, but they know how to put themselves back together in a way that makes them more beautiful than before. This is the lesson of Amara. This is the wisdom of our ancestors. This is the truth that endures.